Welcome to another episode of the Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy podcast, where I try to understand what is that the psychotherapeutic that we can find in all of us, and who are the people that are behind the psychotherapist identity. And today I'm joined by an Iron woman, Vanessa Reiser, who will talk about her therapeutic modality, but also is very passionate to talk about a specific topic, which is narcissism, whose passion I share in this. So welcome, Vanessa, and thanks for taking the time for talking about this.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I always start this podcast by just asking you, what are some words that you feel like you identify yourself with?
Um, Definitely strong, smart, um, an advocate, feminist, mom, iron woman, dog mom, friend, um, athlete, I guess. Those are some things that come to mind.
And the athleticism, was that always present for you, or is that something that came with the development or change? Or
I was definitely not always athletic. As a teenager, I was overweight and I lost, I think, 72 pounds when I was 21. So I got into the fitness world and have stayed there for many, many years. I have completed a lot of marathons, New York City twice, Boston, ultra marathon, Iron Ironman races, Spartans, and then last year I ran across the state of New York in a wedding dress to raise awareness for narcissistic abuse, which was definitely the most athletic thing I'd ever done. And it was very therapeutic and transformative. But yeah, in terms of being an athlete, I kind of adopted that a little bit later. I wasn't athletic as a child per se.
and I always wonder, because I haven't run any marathons. What is the feeling when you finish it, or when you finish your first one?
Oh, it was so emotional. I remember I finished my first one in Westchester County, New York. They no longer have that marathon there, but they would close the very famous Bronx River Parkway. And you did a couple of loops, and I just remember thinking, like, wow, I did it. And then, it was like a bug. So now running is kind of my addiction in some ways. So I have to be careful with my knees and stuff, because I could probably just run all day, every day if my body would allow it.
And I wonder, because you have gone through uh, a lot of things that would break someone, but you've managed, you endured. And even in marathons or Ironmans, narcissistic relationships, there's still something that holds you in that space. Sometimes it's a voice, sometimes it's a God. I wonder, what is it for you in these spaces of deep struggle and feeling like, well, if I do this, I'm not going to survive, or like this feels like I'm not going to survive, but you still somehow manage. What do you feel? What do you hear when you are not held by anything but yourself?
I think I tend to raise the bar for myself. I think I actually am rather competitive with myself. So I don't think I compete necessarily with others as much as I want to see, um, based on what you've said, that I feel like I can do many things. So I'm always curious to see what I can pull off, if I can pull something off. And I have very good friends that are very formidable athletes. I have a friend who did Ultraman, which is 3 Ironmans in one row, in one scenario, not one day even, but one event. And whenever I called him and I said, do you think I can run across the state of New York? He was like, fuck yeah. So I mean, I don't think there are very few things I think I couldn't pull off based on what I have endured and what I've gone through. And like I said, with the exception of like what my body will allow me to do, I'm always willing to give it a try, to push myself.
Mm. Wow. And I would want to get into the narcissism topic because that's something we discussed to talk about. And I'm wondering, the first thing is for me is, what do you think made you vulnerable to that relationship? And what do you think was things that you were your shadow that you were just not able to see?
I had just gone through a breakup just about 6 months prior that was rather devastating. So in that case, I believe I was lured into, so I was rather vulnerable. And I believe I was sought out, um, as this person does with most of his victims. He kind of has, you know, people on the back burner, but also people that he's maybe stalking. So I believe that's kind of his modus operandi. So I think that's how he operates. And I happened to be vulnerable at that time. So kind of fell right into the trap.
And I'm wondering, just to set the stage for people who don't know you, what was that relationship? How long it was, and what was the outcome of the whole ordeal?
So I have to be careful because of I find myself with false criminal charges quite a bit, and in the judicial system, which so many people have to navigate, and it is really hard because the judicial system is not equipped to discern what this looks like, because as you know, the narcissist is the most charming and philanthropic and will cry the fake tears and is overly victimized. And so we don't have judges and attorneys that are able to discern what this looks like. So I will say that I was in a relationship that this person was love bombing me in the very first place. So there was all of these gifts and travel, and you are my soulmate, you're the most amazing lover, the most amazing friend. I, you know, wish I met you years ago. I mean, just on and on and on. I mean, gifts and the chaos of it. There was a lot of gaslighting, a lot of addictive behaviors. The cycle of abuse started, which included the love bombing, and then this tension building, and then a fight, and then the love bombing, tension building, and then a fight. And so this cycle began, which created a trauma bond for me. He was extremely manipulative, had no empathy, was a liar, and it really affected me. So I left finally after threatening to do so many times because it was impossible to live with. And when I did, I shook for 9 days. I was dealing with a major trauma bond, like an addiction. So there's data that tells us that this is basically like dealing with a drug addiction. And I had to put my life back together again because I had moved in and sort of given up my career and all my friends, and I was isolated, and it was really, really hard. However, I was able to remember who I was before, and I was really lucky because I didn't have children with him. And in his relationship where he did have children, he totally brutalized her, as they often do, like I said, in the judicial system. But for me, I was like able to find that girl again. And I consider myself super fortunate because a lot of times people will meet these narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths at a young age, and they haven't developed a sense of self. So they usually come to me with kind of this void of sorts, and we really have to find out who they are, which is an amazing study but they have to be really kind of open to that experience, because the narcissist like can rob you of your identity, but also kind of create this codependent experience where you don't even know who you are. So they really have an uphill battle. I was fortunate enough because I was like, oh, I remember that girl. I got to go be that girl again. And I did, but it took about 2 years. It was really horrifying. I never, had anything. I've had plenty of love affairs and breakups, and it wasn't my first rodeo, but this was nothing like anything I ever went through.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're saying exactly, it took about 2 years. And a lot of back and forths, and a lot of, luckily, good holding from my therapist to remember who I was before that. And I'm still, as we discussed just before this, kind of going out and remembering that. But I'm wondering, at least I know my own story, but do you feel like also your childhood has created a vulnerability, or for you it was also that breakup?
Oh yeah, it was, my childhood was kind of chaotic. And so this felt familiar. I was kind of, oh, this feels like something I remember having. So yeah, absolutely. As well as the addictive component. So in my family, there were a lot of alcoholics. So that kind of has a lot of parallels in terms of the shame and the golden child and the scapegoat. And you see a lot of parallels between the alcoholic family and the narcissistic family and that experience. So there were, absolutely, I was primed for this. And I'm actually in so many ways glad I went through sort of the portal of it, because then it forced me to do the work on myself. And it was during COVID, which was particularly lonely and weird. So I was like sitting in the muck of it, like, trying to figure out like what the hell this was. So I definitely was as blessed as you can be when you go through something like this. And that's what sort of prompted me to be like on the front lines of this cause, because I was like, I think I have to do something for this millions of silent victims, because how could I not be a voice considering my licensure and the work that I do and the athleticism thing? And I was like, all right, here we go. And I've just been kind of, just barreling through it, because I think I speak for so many people that cannot.
Yeah, exactly. I have a very similar feeling, and I'm just literally getting goosebumps as you're talking about this, because yeah, wow, it's really something that you just feel like this just cannot go under the rug, and we really need to find a way so that it's easier for many people who actually don't have voices. And one of those things which I don't know how was your healing process, but I guess for me, still part of the integration is this feeling of you care about him. I don't know if you ever had that, but it's just that there's like, I actually cared about this person, and maybe I confuse it with the addictive feeling and everything. And then there's, you see the wounded child in him or whatever. And then integrating the fact that a lot of that is my projection of what I am onto someone who does not have those capacities.
That's what it is. It's not that you care for him, because they don't exist. They are a chameleon. They're only mirroring you. So really the whole time you're spending your time with yourself.
Yeah.
You really have fallen in love with yourself. You are the magic. You are the happiness. You are the strength. You are the joy. You are the things that they covet. Narcissists and sociopaths do not get excited by your happiness. They want to destroy you. So because they would need to make themselves feel better. So they sort of mimic and then kind of carry you along to the extent that they can begin to chip away at you. But really, you sort of are the magic. And this is how we get people, sometimes it's particularly difficult to leave cults, is that you really have to get them to understand that they are the magic, that they need to really sort of turn that kind of mirror around and really like learn that they are the thing that the narcissist seeks, that they are the supply, the beauty, the gift. Like And it's really hard for people going through this to do that because, as we mentioned, generally there's this foundation of a lack of identity or some vulnerability. So they don't have that cognition and the sturdiness to do it. But that's the truth, is that when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, you're not in love with them because they don't exist. It's a hollow creature. So you're really in love with yourself.
Yeah, that's a conclusion I've came to many times, even during the process. But I'm also curious about the judicial system. And so I'm curious about what's your experience until now? How can we bring that knowledge and how can we make it systemic?
Yeah, I had false criminal charges filed against me, 18 counts. It cost me a ton of money. And it was all because he was going to go after my social work license, I believe, to discredit me and destroy my career so that I would basically shut the fuck up, which I refused to do. Thank God, though, I had a judge that was able to discern that this person was lying. But we see a lot of judges and attorneys. The family court system, specifically in the United States, is just a playground for dirty judges, attorneys, and they don't have enough information, or they don't care enough to learn about what this psychological abuse looks like and how to figure out custody situations and scenarios. And they end up robbing the women, generally based on patriarchy, of their sovereignty, of their finances, of their children. The stories I hear from most people, the trauma is compounded by the judicial system. So it's already a trauma, but now you're not being believed. And then potentially your children are being ripped from you and given to somebody who you think may even be raping. I mean, there's literally like these horrifying stories that I deal with. I have over 500 clients in my practice. I'm licensed in 4 states, and I can't tell you the stories that I hear really like just make you want to rage. I mean, truly, like. But one of the things that we can do is, Tina Swithin is from One Mom's Battle, and she has been developing a rather comprehensive list of judges and attorneys or custody evaluators and law guardians that have been getting bad reviews by people in this kind of trauma. So she's developed a list and she's outing them on Instagram. She'll post their picture and say, what has your experience been like with this, Joe Schmo or whomever this judge is. And she's creating a database. It's the first of its kind, where we can begin to collaborate around, who needs to be pushed out or disbarred of these seats, because this is the scariest place for victims.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, the not believing part, I was very lucky. I say this for this person from Human Resources. He's the human in the Human Resources, because there was no moment where he asked me, are you sure that this is what you're going through? It was really from moment zero, he was basically understanding that this is not how it should be. And actually, I would not have gone through the process if there was no person like this, because he told me, this might be really difficult, but that this is the right thing to do. And for me, it's really, I'm a little bit kind of sweaty as I'm talking about this, because it's still very fresh, but the importance of believing people that are going through really difficult situations is enormous. And I'm wondering, who was the first person that believed you?
Ooh, so this is the heaviest part of the conversation, I think, for most people. And this isn't just about narcissistic abuse, but like when I was working in the Bronx at an outpatient mental health clinic, there were a lot of people that were dealing with trauma and abuse. Maybe they were in the foster care system, and they're oftentimes not as mad at their abuser as they are at the system that was supposed to protect them, or the family member that was supposed to protect them, or so they're kind of looking around, right? So the abuser's doing what they're doing, and they're kind of looking around to say, like, you know, does anybody see this? Does anybody believe me? So that's why we have this really important language where we tell victims that we believe them, because the real pain is not really what occurs. It's actually feeling believed, feeling like, you know, you're not crazy because maybe you've been gaslit for so long. So the believing part is what I consider to be the biggest issue for my clients, is that this injustice of people not believing them is the core of their pain, because it's very hard to believe. We're talking about like poets, priests, and politicians that are in positions where they are very beloved in the community, and maybe they're offering up a lot of money to certain organizations, and like I said, can cry, and behind the scenes they are the most horrifying monsters. And so, you know, this part of being believed is the biggest piece.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering, before people get to that belief part, I'm wondering what can be also done in terms of educating, or even like most of the people that are narcissistic get to these positions of power, basically. And I'm wondering, how can we, I mean, we have vast knowledge about the human nervous system and knowledge of how to recognize people like this, and yet I don't know if any organization does any screening for something like that. And not only that it doesn't do screening, it almost as if like collects exactly these kind of personalities. So I'm wondering, is there any way that you have encountered, or to kind of overcome this part where we actually don't select them anymore to be in positions of power?
That is such a great question. I am writing a book, and in doing so, I've just recently started studying certain inventories or assessments that people can take to assess for psychopathy and coercive controlling behaviors. So, you know, there are some people that I look forward to connecting with in terms of developing a stronger inventory, something that sort of fuses like an FBI test that can assess for lying, and then also one that can assess for controlling behaviors or psychopathy, and kind of marrying this so that you could kind of, let's say, weed out to some extent, you know, who's a psychopath, let's say, because 1 out of 4, to your point, 1 out of 4 CEOs is a psychopath directly. Mm-hmm. So they have no empathy. So they just climb the ladder, stepping on everybody, firing, fuck you, get out of my way, smashing things, and just getting whatever they want. And they are particularly charming, and they lie. So we don't people who are truth speakers don't really expect everyone around them to be, you know, lying. You want to be able to kind of work in an environment that's authentic. So it's really, really toxic. And we saw this in the United States with our recent presidency with Donald Trump, who was, I can't diagnose him, but I mean, I think a 5-year-old could at this point. But that was really tragic in terms of the fallout. You see this pervasive trauma to an entire generation based on his bad behavior and bad decisions and his selfish, you know, antics. So yeah, we really need to get together and collaborate around ways to assess, certainly for people in positions of power.
I mean, there's another interesting thing. I mean, I don't know the research, but I have a friend who is a psychologist who told me that there is some research that actually, if we trust our gut, whatever that means, is that, you know, we have an embedded system to detect psychopathy. And the less we spend thinking whether this is that or it isn't, the more accurate our judgment basically is. And I think it was an experiment where they were like giving people to decide yes or not psychopathy based on images or I don't know what. And then the shorter the time that they were exposed to the images, the more accurate their responses were. So
Yeah.
I was just like, for me, it's more like, well, how do we practice? How do we tune our instruments, which are our bodies, and just kind of come back to that? Because that's what I think has been cut away from us. Is this, and it's not only about narcissism. I think in many places, our bodies and how we treat them and how much we listen to them is actually kind of cut away. I don't know, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Ramani, she talks a lot about not giving the quote unquote benefit of the doubt.
Mm.
So we make the mistake of like, oh, maybe, but you're right, that first kind of like little red flag where something comes up and you're just like, that's, there's that little whisper. Yeah, generally, if you listen to it, you're on point. And I think there have been times where I have listened to it even before this relationship. So I know that it works. And I think that that's something that we need to get into a better practice of paying attention to, for sure.
And I'm also curious, beyond when we go out of this system or of this place and eventually can be advocates, what was your healing process? What is it that you had to integrate from your own trauma in order to actually, as Dr. Ramani would say, not just survive, but thrive?
The greatest gift I was given, there were many, but I would say the greatest gift I was given in my specific micro, perspective was I became best friends with three of his former supplies. So the validation that came with seeing exactly what he does and how he copies and pastes the same thing over and over again, that gift was invaluable. And it wasn't just for me. They similarly were like mutually like, holy shit. Like we were kind of all like connecting things and learning and growing together. And I think it was mutually beneficial. Everyone was kind of obsessed with that validation, like, wow, this isn't me. And however many years this one went through it, they were learning things from me and then vice versa. So we kind of managed brilliantly to love on one another and learn from each other. And it was really important in terms of healing because it made you feel less crazy. You didn't feel alone in that struggle. We were kind of like lockstep, and we talked to each other to this very day, every single day, just checking in, like becomes like a tribe. And I always tell people that are going through this, I know that sometimes the exes are not always willing to communicate, but to the extent that they will, it's always to me worth a try, because that relationship for me has been like no other relationship I've ever had.
Wow. Yeah. It reminds me, my therapist once said, it's like you're like war buddies. And
Yeah,
what happened there?
that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's a really
Yeah.
good analogy. It's a great metaphor because you have this like, it's like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. You just feel like you've gone to war together, especially because everybody comes out with trauma.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that is exactly how it feels. And I'm also wondering, how has this helped you to support your clients better? And what do you think you have brought to them that you might not have had before this experience?
Well, it's like if a lot of my clients, if they walk into like a domestic violence center, it's very much like if you walked into a hospital and the hospital said, you're sick, you would say to the hospital, okay, but what do I have? Right? So we have not done a good enough job in our domestic violence centers, certainly in the US, of highlighting the characteristics and showing people that there's sort of this like playbook that they tend to have. And it creates a clarity and a validation that my clients get from me, knowing that I kind of have gone through the same thing and I have worked to develop language that supports what this looks and feels like. So for them, I think that's the magic. They don't feel crazy. They feel validated, and they need that so that they can process this and move forward. And domestic violence centers will not attach themselves to the narcissistic abuse label. They refuse to do that. Most of them, all of them, certainly in the state of New York, where I ran, because I was supposed to donate money to them, they won't receive the money under the guise of narcissistic abuse. So we have decided to channel that money somewhere else, because we need this cause to be called what it's called. But yeah, we think that language and the characteristics need to be described to people so they can feel validated.
And I'm wondering, and now this made me very curious what you mentioned, and what is it, the essence of the problem, and why the DV shelters are not willing to associate themselves with the label?
I think it's because they don't want to be diagnosing people with narcissism or NPD, because they think, and I don't agree with them, that in some ways that means that the narcissist has like almost like a disease or something that we're supposed to feel bad for, like a mental illness or something. And they don't want to kind of use those kinds of labels. It opens them up to too much. But I just feel like it's pussyfooting around the real issue, which is this is a spectrum of psychopathy that we're dealing with, and we need to, call it what it is. And I have the right to do that to some extent based on my clinical background. So I stay in that clinical space because I think it really helps people when they have the science that supports what this is, rather than just calling someone toxic, because I think that's not strong enough.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting thing in also how I feel like how much people would have an empathy for a narcissist when you label them a narcissist, and basically kind of forget everything that has happened and all the pain they actually caused. And that's a very interesting thing for me, because actually I do the same. And although I have, again, almost clinical knowledge on the topic, it's very interesting how much then it's like, oh, we don't have the right, or this is not the right space, or even in the judicial system. I have a friend who's going through the process of not divorce, but child bearing battles. And she would be actually punished by the court system if she would say he's a narcissist. Mm-hmm. Because then he would go to the psychologist, he would get assessed, and he would not be assessed as a narcissist. Mm-hmm. And that's very scary for me. It's like a catch-22. So how do we go around this? Because then, of course, you can't diagnose someone from one interaction, or maybe we don't have the tools that are yet good to do that. And so, yeah, it feels really debilitating at times when I listen to these stories. So I don't know for you what you have seen as something that might help this problem.
Yeah, so in actually I think in the UK, and there's a couple of other places that have been doing better in the judicial system than the states as it relates to coercive control. So they're trying to use these terms, coercive control, to identify the behaviors of a narcissist or a psychopath or a sociopath. So I think it's working. Me personally, I would like to fuse the concepts somehow between coercive control and narcissistic abuse. Because I think if we marry them, then it checks a box for everyone, because I don't think we can unhand the clinical components altogether. I think they have validity. So I'm trying to see in my book that I'm writing if there's a way to fuse those concepts. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm so curious. And actually, I'm wondering what brought you to psychotherapy, and how was your journey in that?
I only got my master's, I think I was 42 years old, and I got it from University of Southern California, and it was an amazing experience. I was working in the Bronx at an outpatient mental health clinic, and also at the Bronx High School of Science, which is a rather famous institution where young people have to test into this school rather than use finances to get in. So all of the kids are super smart, mostly immigrants, you know, who's going to go to Yale, Harvard. So it was a really cool environment. And also the High School of American Studies in the Bronx. So I was working at those different satellite programs, and I loved it. I just love working with people and trying to help them feel empowered. So it's kind of like my magic. I love what I do. Everything about it. I love, my degree was in community organizing, so I love the macro lens, but I also love, you know, helping people one-on-one. So yeah, it was a great experience working in the Bronx. It was kind of like the belly of the beast. Everybody had major issues, and it was very triage style, you know, kind of like there was a psychiatrist there, and it was fast paced, and it really was intense in some ways. But I loved doing that work, and I love doing the work that I do now.
And what kind of modality are you practicing in, or what do you use mostly as tools in your therapy?
I tend to focus quite a bit on cognitive behavioral therapy and also dialectical behavioral therapy, which I am trained in, which is really, really helpful for people who have trauma in terms of coping mechanisms. So I even use it for myself, quite honestly. There's a lot of great resources there in DBT. And I like the CBT stuff because I think most of us have cognition that's faulty or sort of swirling around that we need to kind of get away from and input counter logical responses to. So those would be probably the two that I focus on the most.
I mean, dialectical behavior is very interesting to me because I always find asking therapists questions like, how do you accept yourself and grow? And it's that's always for me, it's been in my life, but I guess it's even if you are not experiencing any mental health problems, we come to these points which are like very dialectical, and we have to hold that complexity.
Yeah,
So what helps people hold that complexity?
It's totally, they're not mutually exclusive. You can do those things at the same time, I believe. Just organically, I think you can. I think you can stay grounded and also be rather ambitious in terms of what, you know, you want to accomplish, etc.
And what do you think you're the most proud of yourself for doing?
The most proud of myself, I would say, around any of my work, I would say probably getting my son through college. You know, it was really, really amazing. My son's father and I really worked hard to have that happen, and he doesn't have student loans, so that was something I'm really proud of. I just bought a house at the Jersey Shore. I'm very proud of having worked hard enough to accomplish that. I'm proud of the run I did across New York. And I think probably just overall, like, pushing through adversity.
And how do you practice gentleness towards yourself in any of these moments?
Ah, girl. I try to work hard, play hard. So there is definitely a part of me where I try to like decompress on the weekends, spend time with friends, snuggle my dog, whom I love. So there's a lot of self-care that my self-care is also my running. I also love when I run. So that's something I love to do.
So to wrap up, I just want to ask you, is there anything that you think you want to add and I didn't bring up as a question that, it's maybe important for the people who are listening?
You did bring it up, and I'll just reiterate, it's, I believe you. It's something that people need to feel. The narcissist or the sociopath is the charming person. So that should not be a motivator in you disbelieving someone who says and reports that that person, that charming, special person that treats you so kindly, if that person is particularly charming, that's even more of a red flag. So it's not less of a red flag. The more charming, the scarier potentially this could be. So it's the I believe you that we need to kind of spend time expressing to victims, survivors.
As you have said that, I actually was full of chills. And the rapid fire questions to finish this is what is an absurd thing about you that not many people know about?
I used to climb telephone poles for the phone company for 8 years as a phone lady when I was young. So that most people are like, what? That was a great job.
Wow. And then what are the kind of compliments you like to receive?
Funny. I like when people think I'm funny because I feel that levity is a great coping mechanism. So, making things less heavy when you have trauma can be actually really helpful. So funny is a good place to stay.
And what do you like to gift to people?
I like to hold space for people, be an ear. I think that's my magic. And meet them where they are with empathy. So I try to gift a lot of people that all the time. I think that's probably the greatest gift I give people.
And the last question is there a question for me?
Yes. Will you be joining us on my run across New Jersey virtually?
I haven't seen that it's going on, but I think I could because I love running as well. So yes.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your honesty, for your openness, and for all the work that you do for, as you said, many people who might not have the voice.
Of course, I'm happy to do it. Thank you.